4 drunk bikers thought an old, disabled relic was an easy target, until the bar lights dimmed, and a convoy of black sedans sealed the street. Now the Don himself is walking in, and the only question left is who makes it out upright. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. What's a relic like you doing in a bar meant for men? The voice cut through the dim haze of cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey, rough, slurred, dripping with the kind of arrogance that only comes from never having truly faced consequences. It belonged to a broad-shouldered man in a leather vest, arms covered in amateur ink, a silver chain hanging from his belt loop. He loomed over the corner table like a storm cloud, his shadow falling across the elderly figure seated there. Diamante Morelli didn't look up. He was 82 years old, with white hair meticulously combed back, dressed in a red button-up shirt that had seen better decades. His fingers, marked with age spots and faint scars that told stories he'd never speak aloud, rested calmly on the worn wooden table. In front of him sat a simple glass of water, condensation trickling down its sides in slow, hypnotic trails. He watched those tiny rivers with the kind of focus that unnerved people, the focus of a man who had learned long ago that stillness was a weapon. The bar itself was a relic, much like Diamante. The rusty anchor had been a neighborhood fixture for 40 years, though fixture was generous. The floor was a patchwork of stains that no mop could ever truly erase. The air was thick with decades of spilled beer, stale tobacco, and the particular kind of desperation that clung to places where people came to forget. A single neon sign in the corner buzzed and flickered, casting sickly amber light across the handful of patrons who hunched over their drinks like penitents at confession. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business, where ghosts sat quietly with their regrets. And Diamante Morelli had been one of those ghosts for over 30 years. "Hey, I'm talking to you, old man." The biker, his vest patch red, Viper, planted both hands on the table. The wood groaned under the weight. 3 others stood behind him, arms crossed, grinning like hyenas who'd stumbled onto easy prey. Their leather vests all bore the same insignia: a coiled serpent wrapped around a motorcycle wheel, the Iron Fangs, a crew known more for bar fights and petty intimidation than any real power. Diamante slowly raised his eyes. They were dark, almost black in the dim light, and they held something that made Viper's grin falter for just a heartbeat. Not anger, not fear. Something else. Something weathered and immovable, like stone that had withstood centuries of storms. "I've been coming to this bar longer than you've been alive," Diamante said quietly, his voice a dry rasp that somehow carried authority. "I'll be here long after you've forgotten this night." Viper's face flushed red. His buddies snickered behind him, but it was the nervous kind of laughter, the kind that covered uncertainty. "Big words from a cripple," Viper sneered. He kicked Diamante's wooden cane. It clattered to the floor with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire bar. The jukebox, which had been playing an old Sinatra tune, suddenly cut out. The other patrons, a retired dock worker, 2 regulars who'd been nursing the same beers for an hour, a young couple in the back booth, all found something fascinating about their drinks. No one looked up. No one wanted to see. Except Maria. The bartender stood frozen behind the counter, a glass in one hand, a rag in the other. Her knuckles had gone white. She was in her 50s, had worked here 23 years, and she'd seen Diamante come in every Wednesday and Saturday like clockwork. Always polite, always quiet, always alone. And she remembered the small laminated card he'd given her 3 years ago, tucked in the register drawer. Diamante bent down slowly. His hip protested, first a dull throb that radiated up his spine. Then his knee, the one that had been shattered decades ago, sent a sharp jolt of pain through his leg. His breathing remained steady, controlled, even as a thin sheen of sweat appeared on his temple. His fingers found the cane's handle smooth mahogany, worn to a shine by years of use. He straightened up with visible effort, each movement deliberate. Viper watched the struggle with predatory satisfaction. This was what he'd come for. The visible proof of weakness, the confirmation that he was stronger, younger, better. He saw a broken-down old man clinging to dignity he no longer deserved. "Pathetic," Viper announced to his crew. "Look at him. Can barely stand." One of the other bikers, younger, with badly bleached hair, grabbed Diamante's collar and yanked hard. The fabric of the red shirt strained, then tore open with a harsh ripping sound. The faded black tattoo was revealed, a crowned skull surrounded by serpents and roses, stretching across Diamante's chest. The bikers stared at it for a moment. Then they laughed. "Check it out. Grandpa's got ink." They howled with laughter, slapping each other's backs. Diamante simply exhaled a long, slow breath that carried something close to disappointment. He'd seen men like this before. Loud, arrogant, unaware of how quickly the world could turn. They never lasted long. Behind the bar, Maria's hand trembled as she reached into the register drawer. Her fingers closed around the small laminated card. She slipped into the back room and pulled out her cell phone. The card said to give only a name, nothing else. The phone rang once. A voice answered, cold, efficient, devoid of emotion. "Name." Maria's voice shook. "Diamante Morelli." Silence stretched for 3 seconds. Then, "Location." She gave the address, her words tumbling over each other. The line went dead. Maria stood there, heart hammering, knowing she'd just set something irreversible in motion. Back in the bar, Diamante glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:47 p.m. He looked back at Viper with something that might have been pity. "You have about 15 minutes, he said softly. The bikers didn't understand. They had no idea that the emergency number belonged to Sebastiano Lori, current Don of the Lori crime family, and the son of the man whose life Diamante had saved more times than anyone could count. They had no idea that in 14 minutes, this quiet neighborhood bar would become ground zero for a reckoning beyond their worst nightmares. Diamante closed his eyes for just a moment, remembering the man he used to be. The storage room smelled like cardboard and stale beer. Maria pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, the phone still clutched in her trembling hand. The dial tone buzzed in her ear like an accusation. What have I just done? She'd worked at the Rusty Anchor for 23 years. She'd seen fights, breakups, celebrations, and quiet desperation. She'd learned when to pour an extra shot and when to call a cab. She'd learned when to speak and when to stay silent. But she'd never made a call like that before. 3 years ago, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Diamante had pressed the laminated card into her palm. His grip had been surprisingly firm for a man his age, his dark eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Maria," he'd said softly, "I hope you never need this, but if trouble comes, real trouble, the kind I can't walk away from, you call this number. You say my name, nothing else. Do you understand?" She'd nodded, tucking the card into the register without asking questions. Because in a neighborhood like this, you learned not to ask questions. You learned that some people carried histories too heavy to speak aloud. Now, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Through the thin door, she could hear the bikers' laughter, cruel, mocking, the sound of men who'd never learned that cruelty always has a price. She heard furniture scraping, glass breaking, Viper's voice rising in drunken triumph. Where'd the old man think he was, walking into our bar with that attitude? Our bar. Maria's jaw clenched. The Iron Fangs had been coming here for 6 months, acting like they owned the place, intimidating customers, running up tabs they never fully paid. She'd complained to the owner, but he was too afraid to do anything. Fear was a currency in this neighborhood. Everyone paid it, except Diamante. She'd never seen fear in his eyes, not once in 30 years. Even now, with his shirt torn open and 4 men surrounding him, he'd looked at them with something closer to disappointment than terror, like he'd seen this story before and knew exactly how it ended. Maria wiped her eyes and stepped back into the bar. Diamante sat perfectly still, his torn red shirt hanging open, revealing the faded tattoo the bikers had mocked. The crowned skull, the serpents, the roses that had once been vibrant red but now looked like dried blood against his weathered skin. The Morelli Syndicate crest, a symbol that meant nothing to these children playing at being dangerous. Viper circled him like a shark, emboldened by alcohol and the laughter of his crew. "So what's the story, old man? You get that tattoo in prison? What'd you do, steal from a retirement home?" His friends howled with laughter. Diamante's thoughts drifted, as they often did these days, to another time, another life. 1983. The back room of Lori's restaurant. Don Lorenzo Lori sitting at the head of the table, his presence filling the room like gravity. "Diamante," the Don had said, "I need you to think like a chess player, not a soldier. We're not trying to win the battle, we're trying to win the war." And Diamante had done exactly that. For 27 years, he'd been the mind behind the throne, the strategist, the Consigliere who'd navigated 3 gang wars, 2 federal investigations, and countless internal betrayals. He'd kept the peace when violence seemed inevitable. He'd found solutions when everyone else saw only blood. He'd saved Lorenzo Lori's life 7 times. And in return, Lorenzo had given him something more valuable than money or power. He'd given him brotherhood. "Hey," Viper snapped his fingers in front of Diamante's face. You going senile on us? I asked you a question. Diamante blinked slowly, returning to the present. To this grimy bar. To these foolish young men who thought strength was measured in muscle and volume. I got this tattoo, Diamante said quietly, when I earned the right to wear it. Long before you were born. Something in his voice made Viper pause. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't challenging. It was simply factual. The way someone might observe that the sky was blue or water was wet. Earned it doing what? The bleached blonde biker pressed. Shaking down social security checks? The crew erupted in laughter again. Diamante's cane rested against his leg. His hip throbbed. His knee sent sharp signals of pain up his thigh. He was 82 years old, disabled, outnumbered, and exhausted. But he wasn't afraid. Fear required uncertainty, and Diamante knew exactly what was coming. He glanced at the clock again. 9:51 p.m. 11 minutes. You should leave, he said softly, meeting Viper's eyes. Right now. Walk out that door and don't come back. I'm giving you a chance. Viper's face darkened. You threatening me, old man? No, Diamante said. I'm trying to save you. The words hung in the stale air. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Viper looked uncertain. Something in Diamante's tone, in the absolute calm of his delivery, reached through the alcohol haze and touched something primal. Some ancient instinct that recognized a predator regardless of age or physical condition. Then the moment passed. Viper grabbed Diamante by the front of his torn shirt and lifted him halfway out of his chair. Pain exploded through Diamante's hip, his knee, his back, but he didn't cry out, didn't even grimace. He just kept his dark eyes locked on Viper's face. You don't scare me, Viper snarled, his beer breath hot against Diamante's face. I know, Diamante whispered. That's the problem. Maria watched from behind the bar, her hand covering her mouth. The clock ticked toward 9:52 p.m., and somewhere in the city, black sedans were already moving through the night like sharks drawn to blood in the water. Sebastiano Lori had received the call, and he was coming. Viper dropped Diamante back into his chair with a force that sent pain radiating through every old injury. The wooden seat groaned. Diamante's cane clattered to the floor again. This time, he didn't reach for it. That's what I thought, Viper sneered, turning to his crew with his arms spread wide like a conquering hero. All bark, no bite. Just another washed-up old man living in the past. The bleached blonde biker whose vest patch read Razor kicked the cane across the floor. It skidded under a nearby table, far out of Diamante's reach. Oops, he said with mock concern. Butterfingers. The laughter was ugly now. Mean. The kind of laughter that came from people who'd never had power over anything and suddenly found themselves holding it over someone vulnerable. Diamante sat with his hands folded on the table, torn shirt hanging open, breathing steady despite the pain. His mind had gone somewhere else, somewhere cold and analytical. The same place it had gone during the Castellano negotiations, during the Russo ambush, during the long nights when he'd had to choose between loyalty and survival, and somehow found a way to honor both. Calculate, adapt, endure. These weren't the first men to underestimate him. They wouldn't be the last. But they would be the ones who paid the highest price for it. Maria approached cautiously, a glass of water in her trembling hands. Mr. Morelli, are you? He's fine, Viper cut her off, stepping between them. Aren't you, Grandpa? Tough old bird. Probably survived the dinosaurs, right? More laughter. Maria met Diamante's eyes for just a moment. In that glance, an entire conversation passed between them. She'd made the call. He knew. She saw the slight dip of his chin, barely perceptible, but there. Acknowledgement. Gratitude. Now we wait. She set the water on the table and retreated behind the bar, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone in the room must hear it. The clock read 9:54 p.m. Diamante had learned patience in places where impatience meant death, in back rooms where one wrong word could start a war, in hospital beds after the Castellano massacre, when doctors said he'd never walk again and he'd spent 18 months proving them wrong through sheer force of will. Patience wasn't passive. It was active waiting, strategic endurance. So he sat, and he waited. Viper circled the table, enjoying his moment of dominance. You know what I think? He said, his voice taking on a philosophical tone that alcohol often inspired in stupid men. I think guys like you had your time. Back when things were different. When respect meant something. He leaned down close to Diamante's face. But those days are gone, old man. This is our world now. People like you, You're just taking up space. Diamante looked at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. You're right, he said softly. The world has changed. Viper blinked, surprised by the agreement. But some things, Diamante continued, his voice carrying a weight that made the air feel heavier. Some things never change. Respect is one of them. It's not given because of age or strength or who's louder. It's earned. Through actions, through sacrifice, through keeping your word even when it costs you everything. His eyes never left Viper's face. You wouldn't understand that, because you've never sacrificed anything in your life. The words landed like a slap. Viper's face flushed crimson. The truth, even from a broken-down old man, had teeth. You don't know anything about me, Viper shouted, spittle flying. I know everything about you, Diamante said calmly. I've seen 1,000 men just like you, loud, angry, desperate to prove they matter. And I've watched every single one of them disappear into obscurity or graves they dug themselves. The bar had gone deathly silent. Even Viper's crew had stopped laughing. There was something hypnotic about Diamante's voice, the absolute certainty of someone who'd lived through things these men couldn't imagine, who'd survived when survival seemed impossible. Razor stepped forward, trying to break the tension. Come on, Viper. This is boring. Let's grab a drink and… Shut up, Viper snapped, his eyes still locked on Diamante's. I'm not done with him yet. He grabbed Diamante's water glass and dumped it over his head. The cold water ran down Diamante's white hair, his face, soaking into his torn red shirt. It dripped onto the table in a steady rhythm. Diamante didn't move, didn't wipe his face, didn't react at all. He just looked at Viper with something that might have been pity. 9:57, he said quietly, glancing at the clock. You have 3 minutes. 3 minutes for what? Viper demanded. To leave. To walk out that door and never come back. To forget this ever happened. Viper laughed, but it sounded forced now. Hollow. Or what? Diamante tilted his head slightly. Or you'll understand why respect isn't just a word. The door to the rusty anchor remained closed. The street outside was quiet. The other patrons hunched over their drinks, desperately wishing they were anywhere else. Maria stood behind the bar, watching the clock. 9:58 p.m. Diamante's hip throbbed where Viper had manhandled him. His knee sent sharp signals up his leg. Water dripped from his hair into his eyes. He was cold, wet, in pain, and surrounded by men who wanted to hurt him. But in his mind, he wasn't in the rusty anchor anymore. He was in a black sedan in 1987, bleeding from a shotgun wound, his leg shattered, holding pressure on Don Lorenzo Lori's chest wound while the driver ran every red light between Little Italy and Street. Vincent's hospital. Stay with me, Lorenzo, he'd whispered. Your son needs you. Your family needs you. Stay with me. And Lorenzo had lived, because Diamante had refused to let him die. Now it was Lorenzo's son's turn to return the favor. The clock hit 10 p.m., and outside, in the darkness, engines began to rumble. The sound started as a distant rumble, low, mechanical, purposeful. At first it blended with the ambient noise of the city, distant traffic, the hum of streetlights, the occasional siren blocks away. Then it grew closer, deeper, more deliberate. Razor was the first to notice. He'd been standing near the grimy window, nursing his 4th beer of the night, when movement outside caught his eye. He squinted through the neon-tinted glass, his alcohol-fogged brain struggling to process what he was seeing. Viper? What? Viper snapped, still looming over Diamante's soaked form. There's cars outside. So what? It's a street. There's always cars. No, man. These are different. Something in Razor's voice, a thread of uncertainty, maybe fear, made Viper turn toward the window. The rumbling had become a presence now. Not just sound, but vibration. The kind that rattled the cheap beer signs and made the liquid in abandoned glasses tremble in concentric circles. Through the window, headlights appeared. Not the scattered, random pattern of normal traffic, but synchronized, purposeful, moving in formation. Black sedans, 4 of them, glided to a stop outside the rusty anchor with military precision. They formed a semicircle, blocking both ends of the street. Their engines cut simultaneously, leaving an eerie silence that somehow felt more threatening than the rumble had been. No police lights, no sirens, just quiet, efficient danger. The hell? One of the other bikers muttered. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She recognized those vehicles, not specifically, but categorically. She'd lived in this neighborhood long enough to know what they represented. Power. Real power. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. The sedan doors opened not frantically, but with choreographed precision. Men emerged into the sodium-yellow streetlight. They wore dark suits, tailored and expensive, completely out of place in this rundown neighborhood. Their movements were economical, professional. No wasted motion, no hesitation. They took positions with the kind of discipline that came from training, not swagger. One stood at each corner. Two more flanked the entrance to the bar. They didn't draw weapons, didn't threaten, they simply existed, and their existence was threat enough. Inside the rusty Anchor, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Viper's crew had gone silent. Their cocky grins had evaporated like water on hot pavement. They clustered together instinctively, the way prey animals do when predators circle. "Who the hell are they?" Razor whispered. Diamante sat perfectly still, water still dripping from his white hair, torn shirt clinging to his thin frame. But something had shifted in his posture. His shoulders had straightened slightly, his breathing had deepened. He looked, for the first time that night, like a man who'd been vindicated. Maria saw it, that subtle change. And she understood, with crystal clarity, that she'd just witnessed the last moments of the Iron Fang's reign in this neighborhood. Whatever was about to walk through that door would end them. Viper tried to recover his bravado, probably just some businessmen, wrong neighborhood, but his voice cracked on the last word. The door to the bar didn't burst open. It didn't crash inward with dramatic force. It simply opened, slowly, deliberately. The man who entered radiated authority the way the sun radiates heat effortlessly, undeniably, impossible to ignore. He was in his late 40s, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than everything in the rusty Anchor combined. Tattoos crawled up his neck in intricate patterns, not the amateur work covering Viper's arms, but art. Expensive, meaningful art. His face was carved granite, angular, harsh. The kind of face that had made difficult decisions and never lost sleep over them. But his eyes, dark, intelligent, calculating, scanned the room with the precision of a surgeon examining a patient. They took in the frightened patrons, the nervous bartender, the clustered bikers, and then they found Diamante. Everything about the man changed in that instant. The hardness in his face softened not into weakness, but into something deeper. Respect, concern, the kind of emotion that couldn't be faked. He crossed the bar in 4 long strides, his expensive shoes making no sound on the sticky floor. The bikers scrambled out of his way like children fleeing an angry father. When he reached Diamante's table, he stopped. For a long moment, the two men simply looked at each other. "Signor Morelli," the man said, his voice low and rough, carrying the hint of an accent that generations of American life hadn't quite erased. "What have they done to you?" Diamante allowed himself a small smile, the first real emotion he'd shown all night. "Sebastiano, I told you not to make a fuss. You also told me," Sebastiano Lori replied, his voice hardening as his eyes swept over Diamante's soaked hair, torn shirt, and the cane lying abandoned on the floor, "that you would call if you ever needed help. You didn't call. Someone else did. I didn't need help. You were outnumbered 4-1 by men half your age. I've faced worse odds." Sebastiano's jaw clenched. "You were 82 years old then, too, Vecchio, and you'd just taken 3 bullets. The reference hung in the air, a shared history the bikers couldn't begin to understand. Sebastiano finally turned to face Viper and his crew. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. The concern vanished, replaced by something cold and ancient, something that predated laws and civilization. Pure, controlled violence. "Which one of you?" Sebastiano asked quietly, his voice somehow more frightening for its calm. "Put hands on this man." The bikers had backed themselves into a corner, literally. They were pressed against the far wall, eyes wide, faces pale. Viper tried to speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. No words came out. Sebastiano took 1 step toward them, just one, and Razor lost control of his bladder. The acrid smell of urine filled the corner of the bar. Razor stood frozen, a dark stain spreading down his jeans, his face a mask of absolute terror. His companions pressed against the wall as if they could somehow melt through it and escape. Sebastiano didn't mock him, didn't laugh. The reaction was beneath acknowledgement, it was simply a fact, like gravity or death. He turned back to Diamante, his expression softening again into something almost tender. "Let me help you. I can stand on my own. I know you can, but you don't have to." Sebastiano retrieved the cane from under the nearby table with surprising gentleness, placing it carefully in Diamante's hands. Then he helped the old man to his feet, supporting him with the kind of practiced care that spoke of deep familiarity. This wasn't the first time he'd helped Diamante Morelli stand. Once Diamante was steady, Sebastiano turned to address the bar. His voice carried not loud, but commanding. The kind of voice that had given orders in situations where hesitation meant death. "Does everyone here know who I am?" Silence. Maria nodded slowly from behind the bar. A few of the regulars did the same, their faces pale. "Good," Sebastiano continued. "Then you know I don't make social calls to places like this. I'm here because someone called to tell me that this man," he gestured to Diamante, "was in danger." He let the words settle like snow, cold and heavy. "Do any of you know who he is?" More silence, confused shakes of heads. Sebastiano's expression darkened. "Of course you don't, because men like Diamante Morelli don't advertise themselves. They don't need to prove anything. They don't wear their history like a costume." He walked slowly toward the center of the bar, commanding the space effortlessly. Every eye followed him. "This man," Sebastiano said, his voice dropping to something reverent, "served my father, Don Lorenzo Lori. For 27 years, he was his consigliere, his most trusted advisor, his strategist, his conscience." The name landed like a bomb in the small bar. Don Lorenzo Lori. Even people who didn't run in those circles had heard the name. It was whispered in certain neighborhoods, spoken with respect by some, fear by others. A name from an era when organized crime operated with codes and hierarchies, not the chaos of modern street gangs. "My father," Sebastiano continued, his voice thick with emotion, "built an empire, but he didn't build it alone. Every decision, every negotiation, every war we avoided, every peace we made came through this man's mind first." He pointed at Diamante, who stood with quiet dignity despite his soaked clothes and torn shirt. "In 1983, when the Castellano family tried to move into our territory, it was Diamante who found the compromise that prevented a bloodbath. In 1987, when the Russians came with guns and threats, it was Diamante who turned enemies into allies. In 1991, when the feds were building a RICO case that would have destroyed us, it was Diamante who found the legal angles no one else saw." Sebastiano's voice rose, not with volume but with intensity. "And in 1987, when an assassin came for my father with a shotgun at point-blank range, it was this man," his voice broke slightly, "who threw himself between the gun and my father's chest, who took the blast in his leg, who held pressure on my father's wounds for 17 minutes while they raced to the hospital, who refused to let him die even when doctors said they both would." The bar had become a chapel. Sacred, silent. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She'd served Diamante for 3 decades and never known. "That leg," Sebastiano said, gesturing to Diamante's cane, "never healed right. The doctors said he'd never walk again, but he did. Because he's Diamante Morelli, and impossible isn't a word he recognizes." He turned slowly to face the iron fangs, who were trying to disappear into the wall. "My father died 4 years ago," Sebastiano said, his voice cold again. "Natural causes. In his sleep, surrounded by family. He lived to 83 years old because of this man. I exist because of this man. My children who will never know their grandfather exist because this man valued loyalty more than his own life." The weight of those words pressed down on everyone in the room. "And tonight," Sebastiano said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, somehow more terrifying for its quietness, 4 pieces of trash walked into this bar and put their hands on him, mocked him, humiliated him, tore his clothes, dumped water on his head like he was nothing." Viper had begun to shake visibly. "Do you understand what you've done?" Sebastiano asked, taking another step toward them. "Do you comprehend the magnitude of your mistake?" "We didn't know," Viper started. "Of course you didn't know," Sebastiano's voice cracked like a whip. "Because you're ignorant children playing dress-up in leather vests, thinking a motorcycle and some tattoos make you dangerous. You wouldn't recognize real power if it sat quietly in front of you with a cane and a glass of water." He was close enough now to touch them, close enough that they could smell his cologne, expensive and foreign. "My father told me something once," Sebastiano said softly. "He said the most dangerous men in the world aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet ones, the ones who've survived things that should have killed them, the ones who've seen so much violence they no longer need to perform it." He gestured back toward Diamante. "That man is a legend, a ghost from an era when respect meant something, when loyalty was carved in blood and kept through sacrifice. You should have been honored just to breathe the same air." Sebastiano's hand shot out, grabbing Viper by the throat with shocking speed. "Instead," he hissed, You humiliated him. Viper's feet left the ground. Sebastiano lifted him with one hand, his grip crushing the biker's windpipe with calculated pressure, not enough to kill, but enough to make every breath a fight for survival. Viper's hands clawed at Sebastiano's wrist, his face turning purple, eyes bulging with panic. The other bikers pressed harder against the wall, as if they could phase through the plaster and brick into some alternate reality where they'd made better choices. You think you're tough? Sebastiano's voice was barely above a whisper, but it filled the entire bar. You think intimidating an 82-year-old man makes you powerful? He slammed Viper against the wall. The impact rattled beer signs. Dust fell from the ceiling. I've killed men twice your size for less than what you've done tonight. Men with training, with reputations, with actual reasons to believe they were dangerous. Sebastiano's face was inches from Viper's, his dark eyes boring into the biker's soul. You're nothing. You're less than nothing. You're a mistake I'm about to correct. Viper's lips moved, trying to form words. Apologies, please, anything. But no sound escaped except a desperate wheeze. Maria stood frozen behind the bar, one hand covering her mouth. She'd never seen violence like this, controlled, purposeful, terrifying in its precision. This wasn't a bar fight. This was an execution waiting to happen. The other patrons had pressed themselves into corners, making themselves small. The young couple in the back booth held each other, the woman's face buried in her boyfriend's shoulder. Outside, Sebastiano's men remained at their positions, silent sentinels ensuring no one entered, no one left, and no one interfered with what was happening inside. Do you know what my father would have done? Sebastiano asked Viper conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than murder. If someone had disrespected his consigliere while he was alive, Viper couldn't answer, could barely breathe. He would have made an example, a public one, the kind of example that people talk about in whispers for decades, the kind that prevents anyone else from ever making the same mistake. Sebastiano's grip tightened fractionally. Viper's eyes rolled back. But my father is dead, Sebastiano continued, his voice carrying genuine grief beneath the fury. And all I have left is Diamante, the last living connection to the man who taught me everything, who showed me what real strength looks like, what real loyalty means. His hand began to shake, not from effort, but from barely controlled rage. And you put your hands on him. Each word was punctuated by slamming Viper against the wall. The biker's body went limp, consciousness flickering like a dying bulb. Razor sobbed openly in the corner. The other two bikers looked like they might pass out from sheer terror. Sebastiano dropped Viper. The biker crumpled to the floor in a heap, gasping and choking, his hands clutching his bruised throat. But Sebastiano wasn't finished. He crouched down beside Viper's prone form, his expensive suit somehow still immaculate despite the violence. When he spoke, his voice had dropped back to that terrible, quiet, calm, I should kill you, right here, right now. It would be justice, it would be appropriate, and it would send exactly the message I want to send. Viper tried to crawl away. Sebastiano's hand shot out, gripping his shoulder, pinning him in place effortlessly. But you know what stops me? Sebastiano asked. Not mercy, not the law, not fear of consequences. He glanced back at Diamante, who stood watching silently, leaning on his cane. Him, Sebastiano said softly. He stops me. Because even after everything, after decades of violence and betrayal and loss, he still believes some men can be better than their worst moments. He still believes in redemption. Sebastiano's voice hardened again as he turned back to Viper. I don't share his faith, but I honor his wishes, always. He stood, straightening his suit jacket with sharp, angry movements. Then he addressed all four bikers, his voice carrying absolute authority. You will leave this bar. You will go directly to the nearest police station. You will confess to assault, battery, and harassment. Every witness here will provide statements. Maria, he glanced at the bartender, will provide security footage. Maria nodded quickly. Though the bar's security camera had been broken for 2 years, she'd figure something out. You will accept whatever charges they file, Sebastiano continued. You will plead guilty. You will serve whatever sentence they give you. And you will consider yourselves blessed beyond measure that you're walking out of here breathing. He paused, letting the words sink in. If you run, if you try to leave the city, if you try to hide, if you try to retaliate in any way, I will find you. And next time, Diamante Morelli won't be here to save you. The promise hung in the air like poison gas. Do you understand? Four heads nodded frantically. I can't hear you, Sebastiano said coldly. Yes, they croaked in unison. Yes, we understand. Good. Sebastiano gestured to his men at the door. Escort them to the precinct. Make sure they don't get lost along the way. 2 of the suited men entered, their faces expressionless. They hauled the bikers to their feet, Viper still barely conscious, Razor still crying, the other 2 supporting each other like wounded soldiers. As they shuffled toward the door, Sebastiano called out one final time. And gentlemen, your club, the Iron Fangs, no longer has any presence in this city. Spread the word. Anyone wearing those colors after tonight will be considered personally offensive to me. The bikers stumbled out into the night, herded by Sebastiano's men toward vehicles that would deliver them to justice, or at least the legal system's approximation of it. The bar fell silent again. Sebastiano turned back to Diamante, and the transformation was immediate. The cold, brutal enforcer disappeared, replaced by something almost vulnerable. Forgive me, Signor. I couldn't. His voice cracked. When I got the call, I thought, I know, Diamante said gently. I know what you thought. Sebastiano stood in the center of the bar, his chest heaving with adrenaline and emotion. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear or weakness, but from the effort of restraining himself. The violence he'd inflicted had been controlled, measured, but everyone in the room could sense how close he'd come to crossing a line he could never uncross. They deserved worse, he said, his voice rough. Much worse. Diamante took a slow, painful step forward, his cane tapping against the sticky floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. Sebastiano, just the name, spoken softly, but it carried weight, the weight of history, of authority that transcended age or physical strength. Sebastiano turned to face him, and for a moment, the most powerful man in the city looked like a boy seeking approval from a father figure. They put their hands on you, Sebastiano said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. They humiliated you. His jaw clenched. If my father were alive, he would have burned this entire street to the ground. Your father, Diamante said, taking another careful step closer, would have done exactly what you just did. No more, no less. You don't know that. I knew Lorenzo Lori for 30 years. Diamante's dark eyes held Sebastiano's. I knew him better than anyone except his wife. And I'm telling you, he would be proud of how you handled this. Sebastiano's face twisted with conflict. I wanted to kill them. I still want to kill them. I know. They don't deserve to breathe the same air as you. Perhaps not. Diamante reached Sebastiano and placed his hand on the younger man's arm. His grip was surprisingly firm despite his age. But they're children, Sebastiano. Stupid, cruel children who've never learned that actions have consequences. Then let me teach them. You already have. Diamante's voice was patient, the tone of a teacher who'd given this lesson many times before. They'll carry tonight with them forever. The fear, the humiliation, the knowledge that they came within seconds of death. That's a lesson that will reshape their entire lives. Sebastiano looked away, his jaw working. It's not enough. It never is, Diamante agreed. Justice rarely feels sufficient when those we love are hurt. Your father taught me that after the Castellano massacre, I wanted every one of them dead. All of them. Their families, their associates, everyone. This was news to Sebastiano. His eyes widened slightly. I never knew that. Because Lorenzo talked me down. Just like I'm talking you down now. Diamante squeezed Sebastiano's arm. He told me that revenge is easy. Any fool with a gun can take revenge. But wisdom, true wisdom, is knowing when to stop. When enough blood has been spilled. When mercy becomes more powerful than violence. The bar remained silent. Maria and the other patrons watched the exchange with something approaching awe, this glimpse into a world they'd only heard about in whispers and rumors. Your father was the strongest man I ever knew, Diamante continued. Not because he could order men killed, though he could. Not because people feared him, though they did. He was strong because he knew when not to use his power. When to show restraint. When to choose a different path. Sebastiano's eyes glistened. I miss him every day. I know you do. So do I. Diamante's voice softened. But he's watching you, figlio mio. And tonight you honored his memory. You protected someone he loved. You showed strength and restraint. You did exactly what he would have wanted. But they hurt you. And I've been hurt before, many times. I survived then. I'll survive now. Diamante managed a small smile. I'm tougher than I look. Despite everything, Sebastiano let out a short, choked laugh. That's an understatement. These boys, these Iron Fangs, they're nothing. Gnats. Annoyances. Diamante waved his free hand dismissively. Not worth the weight on your conscience. Not worth the legal complications. Not worth dishonoring your father's legacy with unnecessary blood. Sebastiano was quiet for a long moment, visibly wrestling with himself. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But Diamante's words were reaching him, pulling him back from the edge. How do you do it? Sebastiano finally asked. After everything you've seen, everything you've survived, how do you still have faith in people? Diamante considered the question carefully. I don't have faith in people, he said. I have faith in the possibility that people can change. It's a subtle difference, but an important one. He gestured toward the door where the bikers had been dragged out. Those 4 will spend tonight in cells, thinking about their choices. Maybe they'll learn nothing. Maybe they'll come out angrier, more bitter. But maybe, just maybe, one of them will understand how close they came to death and choose a different path. That possibility, however small, is worth preserving. You're a better man than I am, Sebastiano said quietly. No, Diamante shook his head. I'm just an older one. I've had more time to learn these lessons. You'll get there. He patted Sebastiano's arm and then, with visible effort, moved toward his chair. His hip screamed in protest. His knee sent sharp jolts of pain up his thigh. But he made it, lowering himself slowly into the seat. His torn red shirt clung to him, still damp. His white hair was disheveled. He looked every one of his 82 years, but his eyes, those dark, knowing eyes, held the strength of someone who'd survived things that would have broken lesser men. Sebastiano watched him sit, and something shifted in his expression. The fury drained away, replaced by profound respect and love. Let me take you home, Sebastiano said. Please, you shouldn't be alone tonight. I'm never alone. Diamante replied gently, gesturing around the bar. I have friends here. Maria, still behind the bar, wiped tears from her eyes and nodded. Sebastiano stood in the center of the rusty anchor, surrounded by the wreckage of what had almost become a massacre. His breathing had steadied, but his hands still trembled with residual adrenaline. He'd come so close, so terrifyingly close to crossing a line that would have honored his rage but dishonored his father's memory. Diamante sat in his chair, water still dripping from his white hair, torn red shirt exposing the faded Morelli crest on his chest. He looked exhausted, worn, but somehow, impossibly, still dignified. You're right, Sebastiano finally said, his voice hoarse. You're always right. Not always. Diamante allowed himself a weary smile. Just more often than you'd like to admit. That drew a genuine laugh from Sebastiano, short, but real. The tension in the room eased slightly, like a bowstring being slowly released. Sebastiano pulled out his phone and made a call. His voice was all business now, the emotional storm passing into something more controlled. Vincent, the 4 men being escorted to the precinct, I want someone there when they arrive. Make sure the charges stick. Assault, battery, harassment of an elderly person. I want statements from every witness here. I want this documented thoroughly. He listened for a moment, then continued. And Vincent? Spread the word. The Iron Fangs are finished in this city. Any crew that associates with them, any bar that serves them, any business that protects them, they're cut off. Completely. Make it clear this comes from me personally. Another pause. No violence. Just economics. Let them starve themselves out of existence. He glanced at Diamante, who nodded approvingly. That's all. Handle it. He ended the call and turned to Maria, who still stood behind the bar, clutching her rag like a lifeline. Maria, is it? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Thank you for making the call. You probably saved lives tonight. Theirs and others. His expression softened slightly. How long have you worked here? 23 years, she managed. And how long have you known Signor Morelli? The whole time. He's been coming here since my 2nd week. Sebastiano nodded slowly. Then you understand what kind of man he is. The kind who sits quietly in a corner, never causing trouble, never asking for anything. The kind people overlook. I never overlooked him, Maria said, finding her voice. He's always been different, special. I just never knew why. Now you do. Sebastiano reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, expensive stock, embossed lettering. He placed it on the bar. If anyone ever threatens him again, if anything ever happens that concerns you, you call this number, day or night. Someone will answer. Someone will come. Maria picked up the card with trembling fingers. It was simple. A phone number, nothing else. No name, no business. Just 10 digits that represented more power than she'd ever held in her life. "I will," she promised. "I swear." Sebastiano turned to address the other patrons, who'd been watching the entire exchange like spectators at a play they hadn't bought tickets for. "Everyone here saw what happened tonight. Those 4 men assaulted an elderly patron. They destroyed property. They created a dangerous situation." His voice carried authority that made it clear this was the only version of events that would be told. "When the police come to take statements, that's what you'll say. Nothing more, nothing less. Clear?" Heads nodded throughout the bar. "Good. And understand this, Diamante Morelli is under my protection. He always has been. He always will be. Anyone who treats him with anything less than complete respect is making an enemy of me personally." The message was received. Even the drunk dock worker in the corner sat up straighter. Sebastiano returned to Diamante's table and crouched down so they were at eye level. "Let me get you cleaned up at least. My car has towels. Clean clothes. You can't go home like this." Diamante looked down at his soaked, torn shirt and chuckled a dry, raspy sound. "I suppose I am a bit of a mess." "You're a dignified mess." Sebastiano stood and offered his arm. "Come on, Vecchio. Let's get you presentable." Diamante accepted the help, leveraging himself up with his cane and Sebastiano's steady support. The pain was evident in every movement, his hip, his knee, the old injuries that never fully healed, but he didn't complain. Complaining had never been his way. They moved slowly toward the door, Sebastiano matching Diamante's pace with infinite patience. At the threshold, Diamante paused and turned back to the bar. "Maria," he called out. "Same time Saturday?" The question was so absurdly normal, so perfectly Diamante, that Maria burst into surprised laughter through her tears. "Same time Saturday, Mr. Morelli. Your water will be waiting. Make it whiskey this time," Diamante said with a wink. "I think I've earned it." As they stepped outside, the night air hit them cool, carrying the smell of distant rain and city exhaust. The black sedans still formed their protective semicircle. Sebastiano's men stood at attention, their faces carefully neutral. One of them, an older man with silver temples and a scar across his jaw, approached quickly with a clean towel and a garment bag. "Signor Morelli," he said with genuine respect, offering both. "It's an honor to see you again." Diamante peered at him for a moment, then recognition dawned. Giuseppe Ravelli." "Yes, signor. My God, you were just a boy. Couldn't have been more than 16 when I last saw you." 17, signor. You spoke at my confirmation. Told me to choose my battles wisely, and never mistake volume for strength." Giuseppe smiled. "I've tried to live by that. And you've done well, I see." Diamante glanced at Sebastiano. "This one has good men around him. That speaks well of his leadership." "He learned from the best," Giuseppe said. "Your teachings didn't die with Don Lorenzo. They live on in all of us." The comment hit Sebastiano visibly. He looked away, composing himself. Diamante dried his face and hair with the towel, then allowed Sebastiano to help him into a clean shirt, expensive, soft fabric that fit reasonably well despite not being tailored for him. The torn red shirt was folded carefully and placed in the sedan. Evidence, perhaps, or a reminder. "Better?" Sebastiano asked. "Much, thank you." Diamante straightened the collar, his movements fastidious even after everything. Some habits, forged over decades, never faded. Police sirens approached in the distance, the inevitable bureaucratic aftermath of violence. Sebastiano's expression hardened slightly. "I should stay," he said. "Make sure the statements are handled correctly." "No," Diamante said firmly. "You should go home, to your family, your wife, your children. Let your men handle this. That's why you have them." "But, Sebastiano," Diamante placed his hand on the younger man's shoulder. "You came when I needed you. You handled the situation with strength and restraint. You honored your father and protected me. Now go home and hold your children. Tell them you love them. That's what Lorenzo would want you to do." Sebastiano's throat worked. "Will you at least let me drive you home?" "Giuseppe can drive me. You've done enough for one night." Diamante squeezed his shoulder. "Go, be with your family. I'll be fine." For a moment, it looked like Sebastiano might argue. Then he simply pulled Diamante into a careful embrace, mindful of the old man's injuries, but genuine in its emotion. "Thank you," Sebastiano whispered. "For everything. Tonight, and everything." "You're welcome, figlio. Now go." They separated. Sebastiano climbed into one of the sedans, which pulled away into the night, leaving 2 vehicles behind. Giuseppe helped Diamante into the back seat of another, handling him with the care usually reserved for precious cargo. As they drove through the dark streets toward Diamante's modest apartment, Giuseppe glanced in the rearview mirror. "Signor Morelli, if I may ask, why did you stop him? Those men deserved everything he wanted to do to them." Diamante watched the city slide past the window. Neon signs, shuttered stores, people living their lives unaware of the violence that had almost erupted tonight. "Because," he said quietly, "violence is easy. Any fool can hurt someone weaker than themselves. But choosing not to choosing mercy when you have the power to destroy, that's what separates men from monsters. That's what I tried to teach Lorenzo. That's what he taught Sebastiano. And tonight, Sebastiano proved he learned the lesson." Giuseppe was quiet for a moment. "He loves you like a father." "I know. And I love him like a son." Diamante's reflection in the window looked tired, ancient, which is why I can't let him become the thing he fears most. 3 days passed. The news barely made a ripple in the city's consciousness. 4 members of a motorcycle gang arrested for assault at a neighborhood bar. It was buried on page 7 of the Metro section, between a story about potholes and an editorial about parking regulations. But in certain circles, the story spread like wildfire. The Iron Fangs Motorcycle Club, already a marginal operation, imploded within 48 hours. Their leader, a man called Tank, who'd never even met Viper but knew enough about the Lori family to understand the implications, issued a statement dissolving the club entirely. Members were told to destroy their vests, remove their patches, and never speak of their affiliation again. The bars that had tolerated their presence suddenly found reasons to ban them. The mechanics who'd serviced their bikes at discounted rates raised prices or turned them away entirely. The suppliers who'd provided them with drugs and contraband vanished like smoke. No violence was necessary. No threats were made. The simple fact of Sebastiano Lori's displeasure was enough. Economics, as Sebastiano had told Vincent, could be more devastating than bullets. Viper, Razor, and the other 2 bikers whose names no one bothered to remember sat in county jail awaiting arraignment. Their public defenders looked at the witness statements, the documentation, and the resources clearly arrayed against their clients and advised immediate guilty pleas. "You assaulted an elderly disabled man in front of a dozen witnesses," one overworked attorney explained to Viper during a brief consultation. "There's video, testimony, and evidence of premeditation. You're looking at 18 months minimum if you fight this. Or you can plead out, show remorse, take 6 months with good behavior. Your choice, but I'd take the deal." Viper, whose throat was still bruised in the perfect outline of Sebastiano's hand, asked only one question. "Will they find me in prison?" The attorney blinked. "Will who find you?" "Never mind." Viper signed the plea agreement with shaking hands. In the Rusty Anchor, life returned to something approaching normal. Maria had the broken security camera actually fixed this time, and she installed 2 more for good measure. The owner, an absent landlord who rarely visited, approved the expense without question after Maria explained what had happened. The story of that night had been sanitized for official purposes, but the regulars who'd been present knew the truth. They knew they'd witnessed something rare and powerful, a glimpse into a world that usually remained hidden, where honor and loyalty meant more than money, where old men carried histories that could summon armies. They treated Diamante differently now, not with fear, but with genuine respect. When he arrived on Saturday evening, exactly as promised, 3 people stood to offer him their seats. He politely declined and made his way to his usual corner table. Maria brought him his water without being asked, and beside it, a glass of expensive whiskey she'd purchased specifically for him. "On the house," she said. "Forever." Diamante smiled. "You'll go broke." "Worth it." She hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Morelli, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That tattoo, the one they—" She gestured vaguely at his chest. "What does it mean? Really?" Diamante was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. Then he unbuttoned the top of his shirt just enough to reveal the faded crest. "This," he said, "is the mark of the Morelli Syndicate. My family's organization. I was born into it, raised in it, and served it faithfully for 40 years. This tattoo was given to me when I became Consigliere to Don Lorenzo Lori. It marks me as someone who made decisions that shaped this city, someone who carried secrets that could destroy empires, someone who," he paused, his voice softening, "survived when so many others didn't." Maria stared at it with new understanding. "And now? Now it's just old ink on old skin. A reminder of a life that's past. The Morelli Syndicate is gone. The old ways are dying. Men like Lorenzo Lori don't exist anymore. But Sebastiano is different. Better, in some ways. He's trying to build something new while honoring the old. It's a difficult balance. Diamante rebuttoned his shirt. But he has a good heart. His father would be proud. He picked up the whiskey and took a small sip. It burned pleasantly, warming him from the inside. Maria watched him for a moment longer, then returned to the bar. But before she got there, the door opened. A young man entered. Couldn't have been more than 19, wearing a cheap suit that didn't quite fit. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the bar until they landed on Diamante. He approached slowly, almost timidly. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Diamante Morelli?" Diamante studied him carefully. "I am. And you are?" "My name is Anthony. Anthony Castellano." The name hit like a physical blow. Castellano, the same family that had tried to move into Lori territory in 1983. The same family whose assassination attempt in 1987 had shattered Diamante's leg. Maria, who'd been wiping down the bar, froze. The other patrons fell silent. Diamante's expression didn't change. "I knew your grandfather. Your father, too." "I know, sir. That's why I'm here." Anthony shifted uncomfortably. "My grandfather made a lot of mistakes. Did a lot of things he shouldn't have done. He died angry and alone because of those choices. My father followed the same path. Also dead, also alone." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to end up like them. But I don't know how to break the cycle. I don't know how to be different." His eyes were earnest, almost desperate. "I heard what happened here 3 days ago. Heard how you stopped Sebastiano Lori from killing those bikers. Heard you showed them mercy even though they didn't deserve it." Diamante remained silent, letting the young man continue. "I'm trying to go straight, sir. Enrolled in community college. Working at a pizza place. But the name. Everyone knows the name. They either want to use me or destroy me. I don't know who to trust. I don't know how to—" His voice cracked. "I don't know how to be better than my blood." The bar remained silent. This moment felt important somehow, though no one could articulate exactly why. Diamante slowly stood, using his cane for support. He crossed the small distance between them and looked Anthony Castellano directly in the eyes. "Your blood doesn't define you," Diamante said quietly. "Your choices do. Your grandfather and father made their choices. Those choices had consequences. But you're not them. You never have to be them. But how do I today? You do exactly what you're doing right now. You go to school. You work honest jobs. You build a life that doesn't depend on fear or violence. It won't be easy. The name will follow you. But every day you choose differently, you weaken its power over you." Anthony's eyes glistened. "You really believe that?" "I have to," Diamante said. "Because if I don't believe people can change, then everything I've survived, all the pain, all the loss was meaningless." He placed his hand on Anthony's shoulder. "You want to break the cycle? Then break it. Live quietly. Help others when you can. Find someone to love and build a family with them. Make your life so boring and normal that no one writes stories about you. That's real strength. That's real victory." Anthony wiped his eyes quickly. "Thank you, sir. I needed to hear that from someone who knew them, someone who survived them." "You're welcome. Now go. Live your life. Make me proud." Anthony Castellano nodded, straightened his cheap suit jacket, and walked out of the rusty Anchor. The door closed behind him. Diamante returned to his table and lowered himself slowly into his chair. The whiskey waited for him, amber and patient. Maria approached cautiously. "That was incredible. That was necessary," Diamante corrected gently. "That young man came here looking for permission to be better than his history. Who am I to deny him that? But his family tried to kill you." "Yes, they did." Diamante touched his leg, the one that never healed right. "And they failed. And now they're gone. And he remains. What purpose would it serve to perpetuate the hate?" He raised the whiskey glass. "To second chances," he said to no one in particular. "And the courage to take them." He drank deeply. 5 days after the incident, Sebastiano Lori stood in the doorway of Diamante Morelli's modest apartment. He'd been here countless times over the years, first as a child, holding his father's hand, later as a teenager, seeking advice about girls in school, then as a young man learning the family business, and now as the Don himself, carrying the weight of an empire his father had built and he was desperately trying to preserve. The apartment was small but immaculate. First floor, accessible, no stairs to navigate with a ruined leg. The furniture was old but well-maintained. Books lined every wall. History, philosophy, chess strategy, Italian poetry. A single photograph sat on the mantel. Diamante and Lorenzo Lori, both younger, both smiling, arms around each other's shoulders like brothers. Diamante sat in his worn armchair, dressed in comfortable clothes, slacks and a cardigan, house slippers instead of street shoes. His cane rested within easy reach. A chessboard sat on the small table beside him, a game half played against himself. "Sebastiano," Diamante said warmly. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know. I should have called." Sebastiano entered, closing the door behind him. He carried a small wooden box, ornately carved, clearly expensive. "But I needed to do this in person." He sat in the chair opposite Diamante, the same chair Lorenzo Lori had occupied dozens of times. The weight of that symbolism wasn't lost on either man. "How are you feeling?" Sebastiano asked. "Old, sore, alive. All things considered, I'll take it." Diamante gestured to his torso. "The bruises are fading. The pride took longer to heal. But that's mending too. I'm glad." Sebastiano set the wooden box on the table between them, beside the chessboard. "I've been thinking about what you said that night. About my father. About mercy and wisdom and knowing when to stop. And you were right. You're always right, which is deeply annoying." Sebastiano managed a small smile. "The bikers pled guilty yesterday. 6 months each, reduced from 18. Their club is dissolved. Their reputation is destroyed. And I didn't have to kill anyone. Your father would be proud." "Maybe." Sebastiano's expression grew more serious. "But I realized something else. I've been taking you for granted." Diamante frowned. "What do you mean?" "You saved my father's life. Multiple times. You built the foundation that allowed him to create everything I now control. You gave him decades he wouldn't have had otherwise." Sebastiano's voice grew thick with emotion. "And what have I given you in return? A phone call every few months? An invitation to Christmas dinner you always politely decline? It's not enough. It's nowhere near enough. Sebastiano, you don't owe me." "Yes, I do." Sebastiano leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "My father owed you everything, which means I owe you everything. That debt doesn't disappear just because he died. It passes to me, to my children, to every generation of Loris that follows." He pushed the wooden box toward Diamante. "Open it." Diamante hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a key. Old-fashioned, brass, clearly important. "What is this?" "That key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, downtown branch. Inside that box is a trust fund in your name. $5 million, managed conservatively. The interest alone is more than enough to cover any expense you could ever have, medical care, home care, anything you need." Diamante stared at the key as if it were a snake. "I can't accept this." "You don't have a choice. It's already done. The account exists whether you use it or not." Sebastiano's voice softened. "Please, Diamante, let me do this. Let me repay even a fraction of what you gave my family. I didn't do it for money. I know. You did it out of loyalty, out of love, because you and my father were brothers in every way that mattered." Tears shone in Sebastiano's eyes. "But brothers take care of each other, and I haven't been taking care of you." Diamante was quiet for a long moment, staring at the key. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached out to touch it. "Your father," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "was the best friend I ever had, the finest man I ever knew. When he died, a part of me died with him. I know. But you," Diamante looked up, meeting Sebastiano's eyes, "you're his legacy, his continuation. And seeing you become the man you are, watching you lead with wisdom and strength, that's been my greatest joy. You don't owe me anything. You've already given me more than you know just by being who you are." Sebastiano wiped his eyes roughly. "Take the money anyway, please. If not for yourself, then for me. Let me have the peace of knowing you're taken care of." Diamante closed his hand around the key. "On one condition. Anything. You visit more, not out of obligation, not out of duty, but because you want to, because you miss the stories, because your children should know who their grandfather's consigliere was." Diamante's voice grew stronger. "I don't need money, Sebastiano. I need family. You're all the family I have left." Sebastiano stood abruptly, crossed the small space, and knelt beside Diamante's chair. He took the old man's hands in his own. "You're my family too," he said fiercely. "You always have been, and I swear to you I'll visit, weekly, with the children. We'll have dinners, we'll play chess. I'll tell them stories about you and Papa. They'll know exactly who you are and what you mean to our family." Diamante's weathered face crumpled slightly. He pulled one hand free and placed it on Sebastiano's head, the gesture both paternal and priestly. "Your father would be so proud of you," he whispered. "Not for your power or your wealth or your control, but for your heart, for the man you've become despite the violence you inherited, for choosing mercy when you had every right to choose vengeance." They stayed like that for a long moment, two men from different generations, bound by loyalty and love and shared history. Finally, Sebastiano stood, composing himself. "I should go. Maria and the kids are expecting me for dinner." "Of course. Give them my love." "I will." Sebastiano moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. Giuseppe asked me to tell you something." "What's that?" he said. "Signor Morelli was right. Volume isn't strength. I've built my entire career on that principle." Sebastiano smiled. He wanted you to know your words mattered, that they shaped him. Diamante felt warmth spread through his chest. "Tell him I'm proud of him. Tell him to keep choosing wisely." "I will." Sebastiano opened the door, letting in the evening light. He paused on the threshold. "Same time next week? I'll bring the children. I'll make sure I have cookies," Diamante promised. Sebastiano left, closing the door gently behind him. Diamante sat in his chair, holding the brass key, feeling its weight. $5 million. A fortune. More money than he'd ever had in his entire life. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was what it represented. Family taking care of family. Sons honoring fathers. Loyalty that transcended death itself. He placed the key back in the wooden box and set it on the shelf beside the photograph of him and Lorenzo. Then he returned to his chess game, studying the board with the focus of a man who'd spent his life thinking 10 moves ahead. Outside his window, the city hummed with life. Somewhere out there, 4 bikers sat in cells, contemplating the choices that had brought them there. Somewhere, Anthony Castellano was attending class, building a different life. Somewhere, Sebastiano Lori was going home to his family, carrying the lessons his father and his father's consigliere had taught him. And here, in a small apartment filled with books and memories, Diamante Morelli sat quietly surviving, enduring, still teaching lessons even at 82 years old, still proving that real strength isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. It's knowing when to fight and when to forgive, and it lasts longer than violence ever could. He moved his knight on the chessboard, setting up a combination 5 moves deep, and smiled. "Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments." Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.